Julius Robert Oppenheimer, April 22, 1904, February 18, 1967, was an American theoretical physicist. Oppenheimer was the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory during World War II and is often credited as the father of the atomic bomb for his role in the Manhattan Project, the research and development undertaking that created the first nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer attended Harvard University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in chemistry in 1925. He studied physics at the University of Cambridge and University of Göttingen, where he received his PhD in 1927. He held academic positions at the University of California, Berkeley, and the California Institute of Technology, and made significant contributions to theoretical physics, including in quantum mechanics and nuclear physics. During World War II, he was recruited to work on the Manhattan Project, and in 1943 was appointed as director of the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, tasked with developing the weapon. Oppenheimer's leadership and scientific expertise were instrumental in the success of the project. He was among those who observed the Trinity test on July 16, 1945, in which the first atomic bomb was successfully detonated. He later remarked that the explosion brought to his mind words from the Hindu scripture Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." 2.2 in August 1945. The atomic bombs were used on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only use of nuclear weapons in war. After the war ended, Oppenheimer became chairman of the influential General Advisory Committee of the newly created United States Atomic Energy Commission. He lobbied for international control of nuclear power to avert nuclear proliferation and a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. He opposed the development of the hydrogen bomb during a 1949-1950 governmental debate on the question and subsequently took stances on defense-related issues that provoked the ire of some U.S. government and military factions. During the Second Red Scare, those stances, together with past associations Oppenheimer had with people and organizations affiliated with the Communist Party, led to the revocation of his security clearance in a much-discussed security hearing in 1954. Effectively stripped of his direct political influence, he continued to lecture, write, and work in physics. 9 years later, President John F. Kennedy awarded him, and Lyndon B. Johnson presented him with the Enrico Fermi Award as a gesture of political rehabilitation. In 2022, 55 years after his death, the U.S. government nullified its 1954 decision and affirmed Oppenheimer's loyalty. Oppenheimer's achievements in physics include the Born-Oppenheimer approximation for molecular wave functions, work on the theory of electrons and positrons, the Oppenheimer-Phillips process in nuclear fusion, and the first prediction of quantum tunneling. With his students, he also made important contributions to the modern theory of neutron stars and black holes, as well as to quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and the interactions of cosmic rays. As a teacher and promoter of science, he is remembered as a founding father of the American School of Theoretical Physics that gained world prominence in the 1930s. After World War I, he became director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. J. Robert Oppenheimer was born into a non-observant Jewish family in New York City on April 22, 1904. Note 1, E6 to L.A. Nee Friedman, a painter, and Julius Seligman Oppenheimer, a successful textile importer. Julius was born in Hanau, then part of the Hesse-Nassau province of the Kingdom of Prussia, and came to the United States as a teenager in 1888 with few resources, no money, no baccalaureate studies, and no knowledge of the English language. He was hired by a textile company and within a decade was an executive there, eventually becoming wealthy. In 1912, the family moved to an apartment on the 11th floor of 155 Riverside Drive near West 88th Street, Manhattan, an area known for luxurious mansions and townhouses. Their art collection included works by Pablo Picasso and Édouard Vuillard, and at least 3 original paintings by Vincent van Gogh. Robert had a younger brother, Frank, who also became a physicist and who later founded the Exploratorium Science Museum in San Francisco. Oppenheimer was initially educated at Alcuin Preparatory School. In 1911, he entered the Ethical Culture Society School, which had been founded by Felix Adler to promote a form of ethical training based on the ethical culture movement, whose motto was Deed Before Creed. His father had been a member of the society for many years, serving on its board of trustees from 1907 to 1915. Oppenheimer was a versatile scholar, interested in English and French literature, and particularly in mineralogy. He completed the 3rd and 4th grades in 1 year and skipped half of the 8th grade. During his final year, he became interested in chemistry. He graduated in 1921 and entered Harvard College 1 year later, at age 18, because he suffered an attack of colitis while prospecting in Joachimsthal during a family summer vacation in Europe. To help him recover from the illness, his father enlisted the help of his English teacher, Herbert Smith, who took him to New Mexico, where Oppenheimer fell in love with horseback riding in the southwestern United States. Oppenheimer majored in chemistry, but Harvard required science students to also study history, literature, and philosophy or mathematics. He compensated for his late start by taking 6 courses each term and was admitted to the Undergraduate Honor Society Phi Beta Kappa. In his first year, he was admitted to graduate standing in physics on the basis of independent study, which meant he was not required to take the basic classes and could enroll instead in advanced ones. He was attracted to experimental physics by a course on thermodynamics taught by Percy Bridgman. In 1925, after 3 years of study, Oppenheimer graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree summa cum laude. Studies in Europe. 15 men in suits and 1 woman pose for a group photograph. Heike Kamerlinghanus Laboratory in Leiden, Netherlands, 1926. Oppenheimer is in the middle row, second from the left. In 1924, Oppenheimer was informed that he had been accepted into Christ's College, Cambridge. He wrote to Ernest Rutherford requesting permission to work at the Cavendish Laboratory. Bridgman provided Oppenheimer with a recommendation, which conceded that Oppenheimer's clumsiness in the laboratory made it apparent his forte was not experimental, but rather theoretical physics. Rutherford was unimpressed, but Oppenheimer went to Cambridge in the hope of landing another offer. He was ultimately accepted by J.J. Thomson on condition that he complete a basic laboratory course. Oppenheimer was very unhappy at Cambridge and wrote to a friend, "I'm having a pretty bad time. The lab work is a terrible bore, and I'm so bad at it that it is impossible to feel that I'm learning anything." He developed an antagonistic relationship with his tutor, Patrick Blackett. While on vacation, as recalled by his friend Francis Ferguson, Oppenheimer once confessed that he had left an apple doused with noxious chemicals on Blackett's desk. While Ferguson's account is the only detailed version of this event, Oppenheimer's parents were alerted by university authorities who considered placing him on probation. His parents successfully lobbied the authorities not to do so. Oppenheimer was a tall, thin chain smoker who often neglected to eat during periods of intense thought and concentration. Many of his friends said he had self-destructive tendencies. A disturbing event occurred when he took a vacation from his studies in Cambridge to meet up with Ferguson in Paris. Ferguson noticed that Oppenheimer was not well. To help distract him from his depression, Ferguson told Oppenheimer that he, Ferguson, was to marry his girlfriend, Frances Keeley. Oppenheimer did not take the news well. He jumped on Ferguson and tried to strangle him. Although Ferguson easily fended off the attack, the episode convinced him of Oppenheimer's deep psychological troubles. Throughout his life, Oppenheimer was plagued by periods of depression, and he once told his brother, "I need physics more than friends." In 1926, Oppenheimer left Cambridge for the University of Göttingen to study under Max Born. Göttingen was one of the world's leading centers for theoretical physics. Oppenheimer made friends who went on to great success, including Werner Heisenberg, Pascual Jordan, Wolfgang Pauli, Paul Dirac, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller. He was known for being too enthusiastic in discussion, sometimes to the point of taking over seminar sessions. This irritated some of Born's other students so much that Maria Goeppert presented Born with a petition signed by herself and others threatening a boycott of the class unless he made Oppenheimer quiet down. Born left it out on his desk where Oppenheimer could read it, and it was effective without a word being said. Oppenheimer obtained his Doctor of Philosophy degree in March 1927 at age 23, supervised by Born. After the oral exam, James Frank, the professor administering, reportedly said, "I'm glad that's over. He was on the point of questioning me." Oppenheimer published more than a dozen papers while in Europe, including many important contributions to the new field of quantum mechanics. He and Born published a famous paper on the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, which separates nuclear motion from electronic motion in the mathematical treatment of molecules, allowing nuclear motion to be neglected to simplify calculations. It remains his most cited work. Educational work. Oppenheimer was awarded a United States National Research Council Fellowship to the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, in September 1927. Bridgman also wanted him at Harvard, so a compromise was reached whereby he split his fellowship for the 1927-28 academic year between Harvard in 1927 and Caltech in 1927. In Caltech, he struck up a close friendship with Linus Pauling, and they planned to mount a joint attack on the nature of 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 nature. The chemical bond, a field in which Pauling was a pioneer, with Oppenheimer supplying the mathematics and Pauling interpreting the results. Both the collaboration and their friendship ended when Pauling began to suspect Oppenheimer of becoming too close to his wife, Ava Helen Pauling. Once, when Pauling was at work, Oppenheimer had arrived at their home and invited Ava Helen to join him on a tryst in Mexico, though she refused and reported the incident to her husband. 30. The invitation and her apparent nonchalance about it disquieted Pauling, and he ended his relationship with Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer later invited him to become head of the chemistry division of the Manhattan Project, but Pauling refused, saying he was a pacifist. 31. In the autumn of 1928, Oppenheimer visited Paul Ehrenfest's Institute at the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, where he impressed by giving lectures in Dutch, despite having little experience with the language. There he was, given the nickname of OpJ32, later anglicized by his students as Oppie33. 33. From Leiden, he continued on to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich to work with Wolfgang Pauli on quantum mechanics and the continuous spectrum. Oppenheimer respected and liked Pauli and may have emulated his personal style as well as his critical approach to problems. 34. On returning to the United States, Oppenheimer accepted an associate professorship from the University of California, Berkeley, where Raymond T. Burge wanted him so badly that he expressed a willingness to share him with Caltech. 31. Before he began his Berkeley professorship, Oppenheimer was diagnosed with a mild case of tuberculosis and spent some weeks with his brother Frank at a New Mexico ranch, which he leased and eventually purchased. When he heard the ranch was available for lease, he exclaimed, "Hot dog!" and later called it perro caliente, literally hot dog in Spanish. Literally hot dog in Spanish. 35 later, he used to say that physics and desert country were his two great loves. 36, he recovered from tuberculosis and returned to Berkeley, where he prospered as an advisor and collaborator to a generation of physicists who admired him for his intellectual virtuosity and broad interests. His students and colleagues saw him as mesmerizing, hypnotic in private interaction, but often frigid in more public settings. His associates fell into two camps. One saw him as an aloof and impressive genius and aesthete, the other as a pretentious and insecure poseur. 37s almost always fell into the former category, adopting his walk, speech, and other mannerisms, and even his inclination for reading entire texts in their original languages. 38 Hansbethy said of him, "Probably the most important ingredient he brought to his teaching was his exquisite taste. He always knew what were the important problems, as shown by his choice of subjects. He truly lived with those problems, struggling for a solution, and he communicated his concern to the group. In its heyday, there were about 8 or 10 graduate students in his group and about 6 postdoctoral fellows. He met this group once a day in his office and discussed with one after another the status of the student's research problem. He was interested in everything, and in one afternoon they might discuss quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair production, and nuclear physics. 39. Oppenheimer worked closely with Nobel Prize-winning experimental physicist Ernest O. Lawrence and his cyclotron pioneers, helping them understand the data their machines were producing at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. In 1936, Berkeley promoted him to full professor at a salary of $3,300 a year, equivalent to $70,000 in 2022. In return, he was asked to curtail his teaching at Caltech, so a compromise was reached whereby Berkeley released him for 6 weeks each year, enough to teach one term at Caltech. Scientific work. Oppenheimer did important research in theoretical astronomy, especially as related to general relativity and nuclear theory, nuclear physics, spectroscopy, and quantum field theory, including its extension into quantum electrodynamics. The formal mathematics of relativistic quantum mechanics also attracted his attention, although he doubted its validity. His work predicted many later finds, which include the neutron, meson, and neutron star. 42. Initially, his major interest was the theory of the continuous spectrum, and his first published paper, in 1926, concerned the quantum theory of molecular band spectra. He developed a method to carry out calculations of its transition probabilities. He calculated the photoelectric effect for hydrogen and X-rays, obtaining the absorption coefficient at the K-edge. His calculations accorded with observations of the X-ray absorption of the Sun, but not helium. Years later, it was realized that the Sun was largely composed of hydrogen and that his calculations were correct. 43. 40. Oppenheimer made important contributions to the theory of cosmic ray showers and started work that eventually led to descriptions of quantum tunneling. In 1931, he co-wrote a paper on the relativistic theory of the photoelectric effect with his student Harvey Hall 45, in which, based on empirical evidence, he correctly disputed Dirac's assertion that two of the energy levels of the hydrogen atom have the same energy. Subsequently, one of his doctoral students, Willis Lamb, determined that this was a consequence of what became known as the Lamb shift, for which Lamb was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1955. 42.